This is a story and warning for precious metals buyers, which I had been considering telling for quite some time, but it's a little embarrassing on my part, and so I hadn't gotten around to it. But now with the Edward Snowden case, it's a particularly relevant time to discuss this, because apparently 50% of the American people see no problem with our government snooping and collecting data on practically all of our electronic communications. And this is why it's very important that we not allow the government to do this kind of thing. First of all, the PRISM program that Edward Snowden talked about grew out of an earlier program, Echelon, and the Echelon program was proven time and again to be used mostly for corporate espionage. Billions of dollars worth of contracts were given to U.S. companies over foreign competitors based on the spying conducted under the Echelon program. And that kind of destroyed the effectiveness of that program in fighting terrorism or anything else, because the story broke again and again through the 90s and the early 2000s that the Echelon program was being used for industrial espionage. The PRISM program is just an extension of those earlier programs. Now, I'm not saying that these programs don't have legitimate uses, and I think they were very effective, especially back in the 70s when no one knew about them. But once you started using these programs for theft, it destroyed the effectiveness. Now, I know a lot of Americans think that our government would never steal, but remember, with Echelon, and you can research this yourself, it was proven time and again that this program was used for stealing from foreign corporations of countries friendly to the United States, like France and Japan. So it's only a small extension to use this program to steal from the average American. Now, I'm not aware of any case being publicized yet of how this program was used to steal from the average American. So what I'm going to say now is not 100% proven, but it's, in my mind, pretty clear what happened to me. The PRISM program, as Edward Snowden has now made everyone aware, is used to spy on practically every type of electronic communication. And, you know, many people have known about this for decades. I was generally aware for 20, 30 years that these programs existed, and I was generally careful, if I were ever discussing anything really personal, not to send it through electronic communications. But even I fell victim to this and had quite a bit of money stolen from me. I had taken delivery of quite a bit of precious metal from the COMEX. And whenever you take delivery of more than $10,000 worth of precious metal, a electronic report is generated and sent off to the IRS. When you take delivery of metal from the COMEX, especially large amounts like this, I imagine that even further reports are generated. Now, the government and the banking industry don't like anyone taking delivery of metal from the COMEX because this works to devalue the dollar. That's why you see things like the MF Global bankruptcy recently, where the government basically assisted in the theft of that money, although that's not the story you'll see in the press. Again, if you research it yourself, you'll see that the MF Global bankruptcy couldn't have even occurred the way it did, and the theft couldn't have occurred the way it did without active government involvement. I mean, they twisted the bankruptcy laws to allow even more money to be taken than could normally have been taken. And they never prosecuted Corzine, who should be in jail right now, but instead is now apparently opening his own hedge fund. That was a theft in broad daylight if you really research what happened. And the reason the government allowed and assisted in the takedown of MF Global and the theft of those private accounts was that people used the futures industry in order to take delivery of precious metals, and this devalues the dollar. So I take a delivery of quite a bit of metal off the COMEX, and normally I secure that through a relatively standard process that takes many weeks for even me to gain access to any of it. But there was some leftover metal, and I needed to at least let someone know how to gain access to it. And I was in a rush and going on vacation, otherwise I wouldn't have been so careless. But what I did was secure it through a different process than normal, which is extremely safe. But in order to get access, I called someone on a cell phone, not from home, but from my car while I was driving at the time, and gave half of the information necessary to secure the metal. And then the next day, dropped off in a mailbox the second half of the information that was necessary. Without going into too much detail, basically there was no way that anyone could access this leftover amount of metal without both pieces of information, and I knew I was being a little careless, but I knew also that the federal government was pretty much the only one that could both access a phone call and then know that a letter was being mailed and intercept the letter at the same time. So to make a long story short, the letter did arrive, although it took a lot longer than normal for a cross-country letter. and I rushed off on vacation for several months. You can never be 100% certain of anything, of course, but there are really no other decent explanations for what happened. Whoever accessed the metal knew exactly what they were doing. They pretty much would have had to have both pieces of information, and they covered their tracks very well. So, again, you can never be 100% certain, but looking back now, I think I was pretty naive to have made myself a high-profile target by taking delivery of quite a bit of metal from the COMEX and expecting that that wouldn't arouse some interest in the federal government. If this has happened to other people, it's probably been very few people who were even targets at my level, and they probably didn't talk about it if it did happen to them. But it's something to be aware of anytime you take delivery of any amount of precious metal where the government is going to be notified. When Americans think that these programs are just being used for legitimate purposes, they are incorrect. Research the history of Echelon. These programs are used for theft in many cases. That doesn't mean that they don't have legitimate use, and unfortunately, if these programs weren't used for theft, people would be less aware of them, and they might actually do more good. But once you start using programs like Echelon and Prism to steal from people, then the word gets out and everyone knows about it. And that's kind of why I'm coming forward now, partially to warn people who have taken delivery of precious metal. Be very careful about any communication you have regarding that precious metal. I'm not saying that it's an active program of the U.S. government to do this kind of thing, but any rogue agent who sees the opportunity to retire early, why would you ever trust one individual especially within the intelligence community of the United States? But just be aware that this can happen, and that these surveillance programs can be used against you in the same way that they've been used against large corporations in the past. This is why it's very important that someone like Edward Snowden, who is really a hero and who basically destroyed his life in order to make people aware of this, they really deserve our support. And it's unfortunate that 50% of Americans don't realize the danger here. Yes, the U.S. government might not have a policy of stealing from the average American, but any rogue agent can do that. And if you look at the policies of the U.S. government, things like Operation Fast and Furious, things like the assistance to Corzine and the theft of MF Global funds, you see that to a large degree it is government and banking industry policy, and the banking industry to a large degree controls the government. That theft and unethical activities are often a major focus of the federal government, at least. Anyone who doesn't see Edward Snowden as a hero just really isn't aware of how the world operates today.